Day my boss announced I was being let go, I was standing in front of 47 people I'd worked alongside for 11 years. He didn't pull me aside. He didn't call me into his office. He walked into the Tuesday morning all hands, set his coffee down on the podium, and said, "We're trimming operational fat. Noel's position is being eliminated effective immediately." Just like that. My name in that sentence next to the word fat. I didn't say anything. I didn't look around at my coworkers. I just felt something go very quiet inside me, the way a room goes quiet right before the power cuts out. I'd spent 11 years at Hargrove Distribution. I knew every bolt in that building, and in that moment, standing there while 47 people stared at the floor, or at their phones, or anywhere except at me, I understood something clearly. He had no idea what he had just done. I set my badge on the nearest table, walked to my office, packed my personal items into a cardboard box, and before I left, I did one last thing that, at the time, felt like nothing more than following procedure. I submitted the system transfer form, the one that hands over administrative control of every automated routing system, every vendor portal, every compliance dashboard we use to run the entire Eastern distribution network. I transferred everything, and I transferred it to him. My name is Noel. I'm 51 years old. I spent the better part of my adult life building something I was proud of at a company I believed in, under a man I respected. Then his son came home from business school and everything changed. Let me back up. Hargrove Distribution was a mid-sized logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio, family-owned. Started by a man named Frank Hargrove, who built it from a 2-truck regional outfit in the 90s into a company moving about $90 million in freight annually by the time I came on board. Frank was the kind of owner who knew every driver by name, who called vendors on their birthdays, who understood that a logistics operation runs on relationships and trust, not dashboards and disruption decks. I started as a systems coordinator in 2013. Within 3 years, I was managing vendor contracts. Within 5, I was the de facto operations director, even if my title never quite reflected that. I was the person who knew which carrier in the Mid-Atlantic region would bump us to the front of the line when we were behind on a shipment. I was the one who had a standing relationship with the compliance officer at our largest retail account, a national home goods chain that represented roughly 38% of our annual revenue. I knew their internal protocols better than some of their own people did. That account didn't come easy. It took 4 years of quarterly reviews, 2 near disasters that I personally pulled us back from, and more 2 a.m. phone calls than I care to remember. When their logistics VP retired in 2021, the new VP, a sharp woman named Laurel, told Frank directly that the account renewal was contingent on operational continuity. Her words. She'd worked with me. She trusted me. She didn't want to relearn a new point of contact. Frank told me that story himself. He was proud of it. So was I. The trouble started when Frank's son came back. His son, I'll call him Derek, had been out in San Francisco for 6 years. Did his MBA. Worked at 2 startups that didn't pan out. Came home with a Patagonia vest and a lot of opinions about legacy inefficiency. Derek wasn't stupid. I want to be fair about that. He had real ideas. Some of them were even good. But there's a difference between having ideas and understanding what keeps the lights on. Derek had never run a carrier negotiation. He'd never sat across from a compliance auditor at midnight trying to salvage a contract. He'd never watched what happens when a single regional hub goes down in December and you've got 100 retail shipments that need to reroute in 6 hours. He came in wanting to modernize. Fine. We needed some modernization. But modernization, in Derek's mind, meant replacing people with platforms. It meant switching vendor portals, automating relationship management, and what he called right-sizing the human layer. I was part of the human layer. I was part of the human layer. For the first 8 months, I tried to work with him. I documented processes. I sat in on his strategy sessions. I answered every question he had about the vendor relationships, the carrier contracts, the compliance requirements for our retail accounts. I spent hours doing that, hours I could have spent doing my actual job. But Derek had already decided what he wanted. He wanted to look like a transformation guy. He wanted to bring in new software, announce a restructuring, show his father he could modernize the company, and to do that, he needed to clear out the people who represented the old way of doing things. I was the oldest thing in that building. The platform he chose was called Veloroute. It was a SaaS logistics management system backed by a venture firm that had won some awards and looked very impressive in a demo. Derek announced it in March. By April, he was telling everyone it would replace most of our manual coordination processes by Q3. I raised concerns, formally, in writing. I told him that our relationship with Laurel's team was built on direct communication, that her compliance team had specific documentation requirements that no off-the-shelf platform was going to accommodate without significant custom configuration. I told him our mid-Atlantic carrier had a non-standard billing cycle that required manual reconciliation every month. I told him that 3 of our top 5 vendors operated on EDI systems that Veloroute had publicly listed as in development for integration. I sent those concerns in an email. I sent them to Derek. I CC'd Frank. Derek replied, "Thanks for the input. We've already accounted for this in the implementation plan." Frank never replied at all. I learned later that Derek had told his father I was resistant to change and creating friction in the transition, that I had a personal investment in the old way of doing things, that I was, in short, the problem. Maybe I should have fought harder. Maybe I should have gone to Frank directly, sat across from him, made him understand. But Frank was 68 years old and he trusted his son, and I wasn't going to put him in the position of choosing between us. I'd worked for this man for 11 years. I respected him too much for that, so I kept doing my job. I kept managing the vendor relationships. I kept fielding the calls from Laurel's team. I kept the Eastern network running, month after month, even as Derek was publicly building a PowerPoint version of a company that didn't yet exist. The Tuesday morning meeting was in June. I had no warning. Derek walked in, set his coffee down, and said what he said. Operational fat, eliminated immediately. 47 people, all of them frozen. I remember looking at my colleague, who sat 2 rows from the front, a woman who had worked in carrier relations for 6 years, who used to bring homemade tamales to the Christmas party. She was staring at the table. Her jaw was tight. She didn't look at me. Nobody did. I took my badge off the lanyard, set it on the table, walked to my office, packed my things, said goodbye to a few people who came to my door, quietly, so Derek wouldn't notice. A couple of them hugged me. One of my drivers, a guy named Chester who'd been with us since 2015, stood in the hallway and just shook his head slowly. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Yeah," I said. "It doesn't." Before I turned in my laptop, I completed the administrative transfer. Full system access, all portals, all credentials, transferred to Derek as the company's designated operational lead. It was procedure. The form had been in the employee handbook since 2018. Nobody had ever had to use it before. I pressed submit. Then I picked up my box and walked out to the parking lot in the June heat, and I sat in my car for about 10 minutes doing nothing at all. I want to be honest about what those first few weeks were like. They were hard. I'm not going to pretend I went home that day feeling like a man with a secret plan. I didn't. I went home and I sat on my back porch and I drank a beer and I felt embarrassed and angry and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. 11 years. Called fat in front of everyone I worked with. My wife, she didn't say much. She sat with me. That was enough. I spent most of July on my own, doing some consulting work I'd picked up over the years, catching up on things around the house, thinking about what came next. A few recruiters reached out. I had conversations, nothing urgent. And then, in late July, my phone rang. It was Laurel. Her compliance team had been trying to get documentation from Hargrove for 3 weeks, standard quarterly reporting, the kind we'd been submitting on time for 4 years running. Veloroute didn't have their template built in. The custom configuration Derek had already accounted for in the implementation plan turned out to be a line item that hadn't been scheduled until Q4. Laurel's team had sent 4 emails, called the main line twice. Finally, Laurel called me directly because I was the number she had in her phone. "Noel," she said, "I don't know who to talk to over there." I told her, gently, that I no longer worked for Hargrove. There was a pause. "Since when?" she said. "June," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Noel," she said, Our renewal review is in September. I told her I was sorry to hear that. I told her I was sorry to hear that. I told her I hoped they'd be able to get things sorted. I meant it. I had nothing against Laurel's team. They were good people. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of Derek's reorganization theater. I didn't call Derek. I didn't call Frank. I didn't offer to consult. It wasn't my company anymore. They had made that very clear. Here is what I found out later. Some of it from Chester, who kept in touch, and some of it from industry contacts. The Veloroute implementation ran into the EDI compatibility issues I had flagged in April. 3 of the 5 vendors couldn't connect to the new system and reverted to manual processes. Except now, there was no one coordinating those manual processes because that function had been right-sized out of the org chart. The Mid-Atlantic carrier's billing reconciliation failed in July. Nobody at Hargrove caught it for 6 weeks because the automated exception alerts were going to an inbox that Derek had set up but hadn't assigned to anyone. By the time they caught it, there was a $340,000 discrepancy that took 3 months to untangle. In August, Laurel's team submitted a formal notice of concern to Hargrove's account management. Except Hargrove's account management had been consolidated into Veloroute's client portal, which Laurel's team didn't have credentials for because the onboarding hadn't been completed. Hargrove stock. They were a privately held family company, but they had a minority investor group dropped an estimated 18% in assessed value between July and October based on the revenue projections that fell apart when the retail account signaled it was reviewing its options. In September, Laurel's team did not renew. I heard about it on a Thursday from Chester. He texted me 2 words, "They're gone." I sat with that for a minute. 38% of annual revenue. Gone. I knew what that meant for the drivers, for the people in carrier relations, for the woman who brought tamales to the Christmas party. That part wasn't satisfying. That part was just sad. Frank called me in October. I almost didn't pick up. We hadn't spoken since June. I sat there watching his name on my screen for 3 rings, and then I answered. "Noel," he said. He sounded older than I remembered. "I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything right away." "I should have listened," he said. "I should have. I let Derek tell me a story, and I believed it because he's my son, and I wanted him to succeed, and I didn't. I didn't do right by you." I believed him. Frank Hargrove was not a dishonest man. He was a father who had made a mistake, and he knew it. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. He asked if there was any possibility, any at all, that I might come back. Consult even. Help them stabilize. The company was still running, but it was running badly. Derek had stepped back from day-to-day operations. There were talks about bringing in outside management. I told Frank I was sorry, but I couldn't. It wasn't spite. By that point, I had accepted a position as Director of Logistics Operations at a competing regional distributor based in Cincinnati. Better title, better compensation, and an ownership team that, in my very first interview, asked me to walk them through my process for managing key client relationships because they understood that those relationships were the asset. I told Frank I genuinely hoped they'd find their footing. "I meant that too. You were the connective tissue," Frank said. "I didn't understand that until it was gone." We talked for a few more minutes, said goodbye. I haven't heard from him since. I think about that Tuesday morning sometimes, not with anger. That part faded a while ago. I think about the specific silence in that room, 47 people who knew what was happening and said nothing because what were they supposed to say? I think about Chester standing in the hallway, shaking his head. I think about the form I filled out before I left. Administrative transfer. Every system, every password, every vendor relationship I had spent 11 years building, transferred in a PDF to a man who didn't know what any of it was worth. There's a lesson there that I didn't manufacture. I didn't plan it. I didn't even really understand it until months later, when I was sitting in my new office in Cincinnati, looking out at a different skyline, doing work that actually valued what I brought to it. The lesson is this. The real assets of an organization aren't in its software subscriptions or its management decks. They're in the people who know which vendor needs the phone call at 7 a.m. when a shipment goes sideways. The people who have spent years earning trust with clients who have 100 other options. The people who are, as Frank eventually put it, the connective tissue. You can put all of that into a form and hand it over in a PDF, but you can't transfer what it took to build it. Derek moved back to San Francisco about 8 months later. I heard through the industry grapevine. I don't know what he's doing now, and I don't have any particular feeling about it. He was a young man who was given something he wasn't ready for, and made the kinds of mistakes that happen when you confuse confidence with competence. That's not unique to him. Hargrove Distribution restructured in early 2026, brought in a third-party operations firm to stabilize things, retained about 60% of their remaining vendor relationships. The retail account never came back. On my first week at the new company, my new manager, a no-nonsense guy who'd spent 30 years in freight, took me out to lunch and said something I've thought about since. "I've hired a lot of people who could run a system," he said. "What I needed was someone who could run relationships. Those aren't the same thing, and most people don't figure that out until they've already made the expensive mistake." I just nodded. He didn't know the half of it. I drive past the old Hargrove building sometimes when I'm back in Columbus visiting family. It's still there. Different signage now. The new management company put up their own brand alongside the original name. The parking lot looks quieter than it used to. I don't feel anything dramatic when I see it. Not triumph, not grief. Something quieter, the way you feel when you drive past a house you used to live in and it's been repainted a color you wouldn't have chosen, and you think, well, it was mine for a while, and I took care of it while it was. I spent 11 years pouring myself into that place, into the relationships, into the systems nobody else wanted to learn, into the compliance calls at midnight, and the carrier negotiations and the documentation frameworks that kept our biggest account renewing year after year. None of that disappeared when Derek called me fat in front of 47 people. It just stopped being free. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened, not the dramatic version, not the version where I'm the hero who saw it all coming, just the real version. A man worked somewhere for 11 years. He cared about the work. He got called dead weight in front of everyone he knew, and then he filled out a form and left. That's the whole story. Everything else was just consequence. What Derek couldn't see, and I don't think he was capable of seeing it at the time, was that confidence without understanding isn't strength. It's a debt you haven't been billed for yet. He walked into that Tuesday meeting believing he was making a bold decision, and he was. Just not the kind he thought. Every arrogant move has a price tag attached to it. Sometimes you pay it immediately. Sometimes it takes months. But it always comes due. Frank paid part of that price too, and that's the part that stayed with me longest. Frank was a decent man who made a human mistake. He believed his son's version of things because he wanted his son to succeed, and that want was stronger than his judgment. I understand that. I'm a parent too. But love without discernment doesn't protect the people you love. It just delays their reckoning. If Frank had sat with me for one honest hour instead of letting Derek frame me as the obstacle, things would have gone differently. Not for me. I landed fine. For Frank. For the drivers. For the woman who brought tamales to the Christmas party. That's what I think about when people ask me if I feel vindicated. Not really. Vindication feels like something that happens to you. What I feel is more like clarity. When Laurel called me in late July and I heard that pause after I told her I didn't work there anymore, that pause said everything. It said, we built something real, and the people who took it apart didn't understand what they had until it was gone. And here's what I know now that I maybe only half knew then. The most important things you build in a career are not visible on an org chart. They're in the phone calls where you stayed calm when someone else was panicking. They're in the years you spent learning one client's compliance quirks because you cared about getting it right, not just getting it done. That kind of thing can't be transferred in a PDF. You can hand someone the keys to a house, but you can't hand them the relationships with every neighbor that made the neighborhood work. I didn't set out to teach Derek a lesson. I didn't leave a trap. I just stopped showing up, and the absence spoke louder than anything I could have said in that meeting room. If there's anything I'd pass on to someone sitting where I was sitting, called out, humiliated, cleaning out their desk while colleagues stare at the floor, it's this: your value doesn't disappear because someone failed to see it. It just waits. It waits for the people who are actually paying attention, and those people exist. My manager in Cincinnati found me in about 3 weeks. The work you do with integrity builds something that belongs to you, even when you're doing it on someone else's clock. No termination letter can touch that. No restructuring can velo-rote it away. You just pick up your box, you press submit, and you walk out into the June heat knowing exactly what you know.